The warranty on the MetaGrip, provided by the manufacturer, provides replacement of any defective components or workmanship for a period of 90 days. However, it is very important for you as a therapist to realize that if you make any alteration to the MetaGrip whatsoever, the 90-day manufacturer's warranty is voided. Therefore, you must carefully consider before you do make any modification. As therapists, we know that one orthosis cannot absolutely fit every patient perfectly. So let's look at a few suggestions and recommendations for limited modifications that can adapt the MetaGrip to fit your patient's need. Additionally, we're going to look at a patient for whom the MetaGrip is not appropriate because the MetaGrip cannot be fitted to all shapes and sizes and contours. This is especially true of those patients who have significantly progressed disease of the CMC joint. Although the MetaGrip is made such that it does not normally need trimming, there may be unusual circumstances when your patient does need an edge to be lower. Perfect example would be pathology at the MP joint of the thumb, and perhaps the thumb hole itself feels a little tight around an enlarged joint. But the rest of the MetaGrip fits perfectly. In that circumstance, after the patient has worn it for a trial period and you're sure that this is what you want to do, you can trim off the height of the thumb hole. But keep in mind, as soon as you do this, any warranty with the manufacturer is voided, so you do want to be sure before you do any trimming. Now, I have found that the single best way to trim is to use this tool, which is just a scalpel. It doesn't matter what kind of handle you have, but the blade is a size 12 curved blade. That curved blade fits really nicely inside this circle of the thumb hole. So what I would do is I would simply do multiple cuts like this, and I would continue to trim until I've trimmed down, and I would go all the way around. You do want the blade to be sharp. Now, the nice thing about trimming with this is that you can cut off any sharp edge that you create. So you can usually trim enough that you may not need to then do anything additional. But if you're not able to do it with this, then perhaps what you want to do is you may want to take these sharp edges and make sure that they're rounded. The mold itself comes out with all rounded edges. That's why it's comfortable for patients. So the single best way to take a sharp edge on the MetaGrip material and to make it a smooth edge is to use a rotary tool such as this. What you use is a felt pad, which is also called a polishing cloth, and that felt pad will slowly take this down to a smooth surface. When you're using this, you do not want to hold it in one place. You want to keep moving so that you dissipate any heat that's created by the friction. Let's take a look at how this would happen. You can see that it's somewhat difficult to hold in place, but as you do this repeatedly, what will happen is this will smooth down and will be so that you cannot palpate any sharp edge whatsoever. Now, on a rare occasion, you may also want to trim the height here in front of the index finger. This was designed this way to assist in maintaining abduction of the thumb, but in some individuals, perhaps it could be just a little bit too high. You can trim this by simply using a pair of scissors, where you take the scissors and just trim off the height. But again, you have this very sharp square edge. The rotary tool is the ideal to use in the same way, but if you don't have a rotary tool, I can suggest to you that the use of a simple nail file may be okay. It's not ideal, But what you would do is you would take the roughest part of the nail file, you would go in the same direction on one side, spending a fair amount of time doing this. And you will notice after you do this that there's a small little burr edge. It's sort of like the material, the plastic is sort of rolling up. There, can you see that right there? Then once I see that, I would take the side that's much finer and I would go over it to get rid of that. Now you'll notice this takes a number of passes in order to accomplish this. Once I have that material off, still have a little bit to go here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around in the opposite direction, again use the grittier side, and do the same thing on the other side. Spending a fair amount of time and repetition to do this until I've gotten all of the small little bits of plastic off. Now, I need to spend slightly more time on that, but I think you can see that I have been able to take this square edge and turn it into a curved edge. Keep in mind, this is never as good as the felt pad on the rotary tool because it simply is much harder to get a really smooth surface when you're using a nail file. We're often asked if the MetaGrip can be heated and an edge turned or the shape changed. I would say the answer is both yes and no. It's not unusual that you may feel that an edge needs to be curved over, but I would caution you to be sure that the patient's able to wear it for a while first, testing if this really needs to happen. There are two areas I can think where you may want to do just a slight curve. One would be here at the apex just below the index finger so that that edge is rolled slightly, especially if this is a little too high for that individual. The other area may be at the base here, which would be over the bottom of the thumb. Now, keep in mind that because the metal insert is here, you're not going to be able to change the contour of this area. The only thing you're going to be able to do with heat is to just roll this edge ever so slightly. Now, I have put on my thumb 2 layers of a rubber glove because once I heat this, it's going to be required to be heated so hot that I cannot comfortably push on it with my finger uncovered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the heat gun. I'm going to just take this edge, but before I do that, I think it's always wise, just out of caution, to remove the straps out of their holes. Whoop, got my glove. So that you now are clear of the straps if you're doing any heating at all. So now I'm taking this top edge, I'm going to hold it over the heat gun, being sure that I keep it moving and that I'm heating only the edge. I'm going to turn it over so that I'm heating both sides equally. It's very difficult to know when it's warm enough because unlike splinting material that we use, it's not going to droop. Now I've heated just that edge. Now I'm going to take my covered thumb and I'm going to really push on it because this has memory. I'm not going to be able to push it down one time and have it stay there. So I'm going to hold it in this pushed position for quite a few seconds, waiting for it to harden. Perhaps if you have cold spray, you might want to use that. But you can see now that what I've been able to do is I've been able to just soften that edge just a bit so that now it is curved just ever so slightly. I will not be able to heat and change the entire shape, only the edge. I could do the same thing down here if that edge were bothersome to the patient. We're going to talk about the common problem of a prominent prominence on the dorsal aspect of the base of the first metacarpal. And heating and turning up the edge is not the solution for solving that problem, but we'll give you more tips in just a few minutes. There are times with certain patients when you may want to add a small piece of splinting material to block the extreme flexion of the MP joint. Here I've just taken a small piece underneath the MetaGrip and molded it in such a way that I allow some flexion but not full flexion. This then, if I were to be a person who hyperflexed, would block me as I go into a pinch pattern and would place my thumb in the ideal posture. Now, this is simply a small piece of splinting material that is loose inside the MetaGrip. The disadvantage of this is the patient has to keep up with it. It does make it more cumbersome to put the MetaGrip on and off. And obviously this, made out of a low temperature thermoplastic, will not hold up against heat the same way the MetaGrip will. But if you're working to influence your patient's thumb so that there's not hyperflexion at the MP joint, this may be an excellent addition, particularly during the initial period when you're trying to help the patient relearn a new pattern of motion. Okay, this young lady, we're pretending a little bit in order to demonstrate how to create a block for MP flexion. We would pretend that she has a pattern of hyperflexing her MP joint during pinch. Now, she does not normally hyperextend, but someone who does hyperflex generally does hyperextend at the IP joint, and so it's much more of this kind of posture of pinch. So what we want to do is take off our splint, and we're going to mold a small piece underneath the splint and then put the splint back on over it. I'm using white splinting material simply so that it's easy for everyone to see, and I want the distance from about the mid-level of her proximal phalanx and then covering down part of the thenar eminence. So I want a length about that long, and I'm simply going to cut very simple shape here, like that. Remember, you can always cut off, so make it a little too large. Okay, I have cut this small shape, which is equal to the length of about midway on her proximal phalanx down over part of the thenar eminence. And I'm molding this carefully with her MP joint semi-flexed. And then I'm going to pull the straps out a little bit. So this is easier than usual to go on. And I'm placing the MetaGrip with the metal opened very carefully over the molded piece of material. There we go. Now, let's fasten this and squeeze the metal. Now, we want to be sure that she can flex the MP to a certain point, but not beyond that. So here we have about the correct range of MP flexion, but we're blocking any additional flexion, so she's not able to hyperflex. Now what I would do is, I find that we've ended up in this video with this a little high. I would probably cut that back ever so slightly and roll it. So here you can see that we have an insert that's being held in place by the MetaGrip, and when she attempts to pinch, she's blocked in further flexion at the MP joint. Now the disadvantage obviously is that each time she puts on and takes off the MetaGrip, she has to insert this, and it is a separate piece, and that it would probably have to be replaced because it's low temperature. But this may be a very good way to help her reestablish a balanced pinch posture. Another possibility is you may wish to block MP joint extension. If you place the MetaGrip on my thumb and during my pinch I collapsed my MP joint into hyperextension, then this indeed may be an insert that you would like to put inside the MetaGrip again, to create this excellent posture of distributing pressure when pinching. You'll notice that I cannot hyperextend my MP joint in the MetaGrip. Now, by blocking the MP in flexion, I do restrict a little bit the web space. So it really depends and is very patient specific as to whether or not this is an insert that you'd like to mold for your patient. It's the same as the flexion blocking in that it's a separate piece that I can pull out and take out. Perhaps I would only wear it during certain tasks or during certain exercises when I'm really working on stabilizing in the ideal posture. As a therapist, you're going to be able to determine whether this is something that you would want the patient to use in addition to just using the MetaGrip. You'll notice that after she's worn this for a short period of time, that she does have some redness here, which is pressure from the MetaGrip. This is always problematic when there is significant bony prominence in this area. So let's look at some possible solutions to relieve that pressure. The first thing I would do is I would take the MetaGrip and I would open it back up, and I would make a point. I was opening it just on this end, and I now would take a look at it from the view of pressure in that area and minimizing that pressure. So I've still kept this very snug, but I am not going to press as snugly there. I'm going to press beyond it and see if I can get a little bit different adjustment to it. And I would ask her, does that feel like I relieved any pressure right there?
Yes.
Yes. So her answer is yes. Perhaps I'm not able to adequately relieve it here. Perhaps it's a fairly large prominence. So let's look at a couple of things that we could do. First of all, this is the high spot. So we don't want to add any padding, because adding padding on the MetaGrip would simply provide more pressure there. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to mark where her prominence is, and then I'm going to quickly put the MetaGrip on, seat it, press it down intentionally, because what I'm looking for is I'm looking for those marks transferring to the inside of the MetaGrip. You see that? That shows me that that's where she's getting pressure. And so what I need to do is I need to relieve that pressure by putting something around it. Now, my preference would be to use some type of silicone gel product. And here's a variety. Here is a small disc, relatively thick, I would think, for this purpose. But if I had a patient who had a larger prominence, I might use this thicker gel pad that's self-adhesive. This is silicone that has been molded to fit over the thumb MP joint. And that may not be much help if the prominence is really large, but it may just be enough to lift it off the prominence proximally. And we could cut this here proximally in order to lift it off. This actually is manufactured for the great toe, so you may want to look at some of the products for the foot if you're looking for these products. This is a much thinner piece of silicone, and it has a mesh impregnated in it, but it too is self-adhesive. This I would use more to apply to relieve friction rather than to relieve pressure. So let's take, since her MetaGrip was slightly large for her, let's choose this one, just out of curiosity. And let's put this on her thumb. But what I would need to do, you see it covers over that area. I'm actually now going to use a pair of scissors and make sure that it is shy of that area. I'd like to round it so that it fits her somewhat more precisely. Now, we've lifted pressure off of that area. So let's take her MetaGrip, place it on one more time, sliding it in like that. Oh, I had a strap turned. There we go. That's much easier. Now, it does cover her MP joint, But remember, this was slightly large for her. So now I think maybe the fit is more precise. And the question is, do you feel any pressure there? She says that that feels good because what we've done is we've lifted it off the pressure area. I could have done the same thing by taking this pad, dividing it in two, putting it on each side, or I could have used the thinner and used multiple layers. So there are a number of ways to use the silicone products to relieve pressure on the bony prominence. And as therapists, we know that you have to look at the patient specifically, decide what the precise need is, and customize it to the patient. I prefer this simply because when she removes the MetaGrip, this piece is separate and it's easily washable. If I were to take the other and apply it to the MetaGrip, then washing this in the washing machine and getting her hands wet would become very different for her, and that, from my point of view, is not highly desirable. So if you want to relieve pressure, just remember that you need to put something short of where the pressure area is and not on top of it.